Marcus Williams walked slowly down Pine Street, his backpack heavy with books from the public library. The 15-year-old boy had spent the whole afternoon reading about constitutional law, just like he did every day after school. His father's old law book sat in his backpack, worn and filled with notes that Marcus had added over the past 2 years. The sun was getting low in the sky. Marcus knew his mother would be waiting for him at home with dinner. She worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment, and Marcus never wanted to worry her by being late. He walked faster, his sneakers making soft sounds on the sidewalk. Marcus loved his neighborhood even though it was not the safest place in the city. Old brick buildings lined the streets. Some had broken windows. Some had graffiti on the walls. But this was home, and Marcus knew every street and every corner. As he walked past the corner store, Marcus heard a car engine behind him. The sound got louder and closer. He looked over his shoulder and saw a police car moving slowly next to him. The car had 2 officers inside. They were looking at him through the window. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had not done anything wrong, but he knew that sometimes that did not matter. His father had taught him to always be respectful to police officers, but also to know his rights. His father was gone now, but those lessons stayed with Marcus every day. The police car stopped next to the curb. Both officers got out. They were both white men, one tall and thin, the other shorter with a thick mustache. The tall officer walked toward Marcus while the shorter one stayed by the car. "Hey, kid," the tall officer called out. "Stop right there." Marcus stopped walking. His heart started beating faster, but he kept his face calm. "Good evening, officer," he said politely. "Is there something I can help you with?" The tall officer looked Marcus up and down. He looked at Marcus's clothes, his backpack, and his face. "We got a call about a bike theft in this area. Young black male about your age riding a red bicycle. You matched the description." Marcus felt confused. "I'm sorry, officer, but I don't have a bicycle. I've been walking home from the library." He started to reach for his backpack to show his library card, but the officer held up his hand. "Don't reach for anything," the officer said sharply. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus put his hands up slightly, showing his palms. "I was just going to show you my library card. I checked out some books today. I can prove I was at the library." The shorter officer walked over. "Where's your bike now?" he asked. "I don't have a bike," Marcus said again. "I walk everywhere." "I live just 4 blocks from here." The tall officer looked annoyed. "Look, kid, we have witnesses who saw someone who looks just like you stealing a red bike from the park. About an hour ago," Marcus thought quickly. An hour ago he had been sitting in the library reading room. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, had helped him find a book about the Fourth Amendment. There were other people there who had seen him. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake," Marcus said carefully. "I was at the Riverside Public Library an hour ago. Mrs. Chen can tell you. There are security cameras there too." The shorter officer laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Security cameras? You think we're going to check security cameras because you say so?" Marcus felt his father's voice in his head. "Stay calm, be respectful, know your rights, but also be smart. I understand you have a job to do," Marcus said, "but I really haven't done anything wrong. If you could just let me show you my library card and my student ID, maybe we can clear this up." The tall officer moved closer. "You know what? I think you're lying. Why don't you empty your pockets?" Marcus knew his rights. He had read about them in his father's books many times. "Officer, do you have a warrant to search me? Or do you have probable cause to believe I committed a crime?" Both officers looked surprised. The shorter one frowned. "What did you just say?" "I asked if you have probable cause," Marcus repeated. "According to the Fourth Amendment, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to search me." The tall officer's face got red. "Don't you quote law at me, kid. Just empty your pockets." Marcus felt scared, but he also felt his father's strength inside him. "Officer, I'm trying to cooperate, but I also know my constitutional rights. I haven't done anything wrong." The situation was getting worse. Other people on the street had stopped to watch. Marcus could see them whispering and pointing. Some had their phones out, maybe recording. The shorter officer went back to the police car and talked into his radio. Marcus could not hear what he was saying, but he heard the words suspect and uncooperative. When the officer came back, his face was serious. "Kid, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We have a description and you match it. Now we can do this easy way or the hard way." Marcus felt tears starting in his eyes, but he did not let them fall. What does the description say exactly? The tall officer pulled out a small notebook. Black male, 15 to 17 years old, wearing dark clothes, riding a red bicycle. Marcus looked down at his clothes. He was wearing a dark blue hoodie and jeans. Officer, that description could fit a lot of people. And I'm not riding a bicycle, I'm walking. Maybe you hid the bike, the shorter officer said. Maybe you left it somewhere after you stole it. Marcus felt frustrated. How could he prove something that never happened? If I stole a bike, where is it? You can search this whole street. You won't find any bike that belongs to me. The tall officer was losing patience. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Am I under arrest? Marcus asked. What am I being charged with? Suspected theft and resisting an officer, the tall officer said as he pulled out handcuffs. Marcus could not believe what was happening. I'm not resisting. I've been cooperative. I just asked about my rights. But the officer was already putting the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists. They were cold and too tight. Marcus winced but did not cry out. You have the right to remain silent, the officer started saying, but Marcus already knew the Miranda rights by heart. His father had made him memorize them when he was 12. As they walked Marcus to the police car, he saw his neighbors watching from their windows and porches. Mrs. Rodriguez from his building looked shocked. She had known Marcus since he was a little boy. She knew he was a good kid who never caused trouble. The officers put Marcus in the back seat of the police car. The seats were hard plastic and there were no door handles on the inside. A thick piece of glass separated him from the front seat. As the car started moving, Marcus looked out the window at his neighborhood. He thought about his mother, who would be worried when he did not come home. He thought about his grandmother, who always said that education and knowing your rights were the most important things in life. Most of all, he thought about his father. His father had been a public defender who helped people who could not afford lawyers. He had always told Marcus that the law was supposed to protect everyone equally, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. But sitting in the back of that police car, Marcus was not sure if that was really true. He had done nothing wrong, but he was in handcuffs anyway. He had tried to be respectful and cooperative, but it had not mattered. The officers in the front seat were talking quietly, but Marcus could hear some of their words. They were talking about kids these days and no respect for authority. They did not seem to care that they might have arrested an innocent person. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. He thought about all the legal cases he had read about. He thought about all the times his father had told him that justice was not always easy to find, but it was always worth fighting for. The police station was getting closer. Marcus did not know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He would not give up. He would use everything his father had taught him, and everything he had learned from those law books to prove his innocence. The car pulled into the police station parking lot, and Marcus took a deep breath. This was just the beginning. The police station smelled like old coffee and cleaning supplies. Marcus walked between the two officers, his hands still cuffed behind his back. The building was older than his school, with green walls and bright white lights that hurt his eyes. Other officers looked up as they passed. Some stared at Marcus with curious eyes. Others just went back to their paperwork. Marcus tried to walk tall and keep his head up, just like his father had taught him. At the front desk, a heavy woman with gray hair looked at Marcus over her glasses. Another one? She asked the tall officer. Bike theft suspect, the officer replied. Uncooperative. Kept asking about warrants and constitutional rights. The woman shook her head. They all think they're lawyers these days. She looked at Marcus. What's your name, kid? Marcus Williams, he answered politely. Age? 15, the woman wrote on a form. Parents' phone number? Marcus gave her his mother's work number and her cell phone. He hoped they would call her soon. She would be worried sick when he did not come home for dinner. Empty your pockets on the counter, the tall officer said after taking off Marcus's handcuffs. Marcus pulled out his wallet, his house keys, and his phone. The wallet had $12, his school ID, his library card, and a photo of his father. The officer looked through everything carefully. What's this? The officer asked, holding up Marcus's library card. It's my library card, Marcus said. I go there almost every day after school. The officer looked at the date stamp on the card. It showed that Marcus had checked out books that very afternoon. But the officer just put the card down without saying anything about it. Next, they searched Marcus's backpack. Inside were 3 library books about constitutional law, his father's old legal notebook, and his homework. The officer flipped through the legal notebook, frowning at all the notes Marcus had written. "Why do you have all this law stuff?" the shorter officer asked. "My father was a lawyer," Marcus explained. "I like to read his books and learn about the law." "Your father's a lawyer?" the woman at the desk asked, sounding surprised. "He was," Marcus said quietly. "He died 2 years ago." The room got quiet for a moment. Then the tall officer cleared his throat. "Well, knowing about law books doesn't make you innocent." They took Marcus to a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The walls were painted yellow, but the paint was old and chipped. There was a mirror on one wall that Marcus knew was probably a one-way window. "Sit down and wait," the tall officer said. "Someone will come talk to you soon." Marcus sat in the hard metal chair and looked around the room. He had seen rooms like this in movies and TV shows, but being in one was different. It felt smaller and more frightening than he had expected. After about 30 minutes, a tired-looking woman came in. She was wearing a wrinkled suit and carrying a thick folder. Her hair was messy, and she looked like she had not slept much. "Hi, Marcus, I'm Janet Miller. I'm a public defender. I'm here to help you." Marcus felt a little better. "Thank you, Ms. Miller, I didn't steal anything. This is all a mistake." Ms. Miller sat down and opened the folder. "Let's see what we have here." She read for a few minutes, turning pages quickly. "Okay, so you're charged with theft of a bicycle. The police say you match the description of the suspect." "But I don't have a bicycle," Marcus said. "I was at the library when this happened." "There are witnesses. There are cameras." Ms. Miller nodded, but she did not look very interested. "Uh-huh. Well, the prosecution is probably going to offer a plea deal. Maybe community service and probation, if you're lucky." Marcus could not believe what he was hearing. "A plea deal? But I'm innocent. I didn't do anything wrong." "Look, kid," Ms. Miller said, closing the folder. "The system is backed up. Everyone says they're innocent. Sometimes it's easier to just take the deal and move on with your life." "But that's not justice," Marcus said. "If I take a plea deal, I'm saying I did something I didn't do. That goes on my record forever." Ms. Miller looked at Marcus like he was being difficult. "This is how the system works. Fighting the charges will take months, maybe a year. You'll have to come to court multiple times. Your family will have to take time off work. And you might lose anyway." Marcus thought about his father. His father would never have given up so easily. His father always fought for his clients, especially when they were innocent. "What about the evidence?" Marcus asked. "What about my alibi? What about the fact that no one ever found a stolen bicycle?" Ms. Miller shrugged. "The prosecution says they have witnesses who saw you with a bike. That's usually enough for a conviction. Can I see the police report? Can I see the witness statements?" Marcus asked. Ms. Miller looked surprised. "Why do you want to see all that?" "Because I have a right to see the evidence against me," Marcus said. "That's basic due process." Ms. Miller stared at Marcus for a long moment. "How old did you say you were?" 15. "And you know about due process?" Marcus nodded. "My father taught me about the law. I've been reading his law book since he died." Ms. Miller looked uncomfortable. "Well, yes, you do have a right to see the evidence. But like I said, it's usually easier to just take the plea deal." "I want to see the evidence," Marcus said firmly. Ms. Miller sighed. "Fine. I'll request it from the prosecution. But it might take a few days." "How long do I have to stay here?" Marcus asked. "There's a hearing tomorrow morning. The judge will decide if you can go home or if you have to stay in juvenile detention until trial." Marcus felt scared. He had never been away from home for even one night. His mother would be terrified. His grandmother would be worried sick. After Ms. Miller left, a guard came to take Marcus to the juvenile holding area. It was different from the adult jail, but it was still a jail. There were several cells with metal bars and small windows. Marcus's cell had a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a small sink, and a toilet. There was one small window high up on the wall, but he could not see much through it. In the cell next to his, there was another boy about Marcus's age. The boy looked like he had been there for a while. His clothes were wrinkled and his hair was messy. "First time?" the boy asked. "Yeah," Marcus said. "You?" The boy laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. "Third time?" "I'm Jerome." "What did they get you for?" "They say I stole a bicycle." "But I didn't," Jerome nodded. "They all say we did something. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. Doesn't seem to matter much. That made Marcus sad. It should matter. The truth should always matter. You sound like my grandma, Jerome said. She always talks about justice and truth and all that. But look where I am. Marcus lay down on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. There was a small stain that looked like a cloud. He thought about his mother coming home from work and finding out he was not there. He thought about his grandmother's face when she heard the news. But mostly he thought about his father. His father had spent his whole life defending people who were accused of crimes. Some were guilty, some were innocent, but his father had always said that everyone deserved a good defense. Everyone deserved to have someone fight for them. Now Marcus needed someone to fight for him. Ms. Miller did not seem very interested in fighting. She just wanted him to give up and take a deal for something he did not do. Marcus closed his eyes and remembered sitting in his father's office when he was younger. The walls were covered with law books. His father's desk was always messy with papers and files. But his father always had time to explain things to Marcus. The law is like a tool, his father had said. It can be used to help people or to hurt people. The important thing is to make sure it's used fairly. Right now, Marcus did not think the law was being used fairly at all, but he was not going to give up. He was going to use everything his father had taught him to prove his innocence. In the morning, he would go to court. He would face a judge who would decide his future. Marcus did not know what would happen, but he knew he would not let his father down. As the lights in the jail went out, Marcus whispered a prayer. He prayed for strength, he prayed for courage, and he prayed that somehow the truth would come out. Outside his small window, the city was going to sleep. But Marcus stayed awake for a long time, thinking about justice and truth and wondering if a 15-year-old boy could really fight a system that seemed determined to find him guilty. Judge Harold Richardson sat in his office at 7:30 in the morning, drinking his third cup of black coffee. At 62 years old, he had been a judge for 23 years. His gray hair was perfectly combed, and his black robe hung neatly on a hook behind his desk. The judge looked through the morning's court schedule. There were 12 cases to hear before lunch. Most of them were young people charged with small crimes. Shoplifting, fighting, skipping school, and bike theft. Judge Richardson was known for being tough on juvenile crime. He believed that young people needed to learn respect for the law early, or they would end up in serious trouble later. Many lawyers in the city thought he was too harsh, but the judge believed he was helping these kids by being strict. He picked up the file for Marcus Williams, 15 years old, charged with bicycle theft. The boy had no previous arrests, which was good. But the police report said he had been uncooperative and had resisted questioning. The judge frowned. He did not like it when young people argued with police officers. The judge read that Marcus had asked about warrants and constitutional rights during his arrest. That annoyed Judge Richardson. He thought too many young people watched TV shows about lawyers and thought they knew about the law. In his experience, kids who talked about their rights were usually trying to hide something. Judge Richardson finished his coffee and walked to his courtroom. The room was large with high ceilings and dark wood everywhere. His bench sat high above everything else so he could look down at the lawyers and defendants. Behind the lawyers' tables, there were several rows of seats for family members and observers. The bailiff, Officer Martinez, was already in the courtroom checking that everything was ready. He had worked with Judge Richardson for 8 years and knew exactly how the judge liked things to be done. "Good morning, Your Honor," Officer Martinez said. "We have a full schedule today." "I see that," the judge replied, settling into his chair. "Let's start on time and move through these cases quickly. I have a lunch meeting at 12:30. At 9 a.m. sharp, they brought in the first case." Judge Richardson worked through the morning efficiently. A girl who had been caught shoplifting got 30 hours of community service. A boy who had been fighting at school got probation and anger management classes. Most of the defendants were scared and quiet. Their lawyers did most of the talking. The judge liked it that way. Quick, simple, efficient. At 10:45, Officer Martinez called out, "The People versus Marcus Williams." Judge Richardson looked up as they brought Marcus into the courtroom. The boy was wearing a clean white shirt and dark pants that his mother had brought to the jail that morning. His hands were not cuffed, but he walked between two officers. Marcus looked around the courtroom with careful eyes. He had never been in a real courtroom before, only seen them in movies. It was bigger than he had expected and more formal. Everything was designed to make people feel small and powerless. But Marcus did not feel powerless. He felt nervous, yes, but also determined. He had spent most of the night thinking about this moment and preparing for what he would say. In the gallery behind the lawyers' tables, Marcus saw his mother and grandmother sitting in the front row. His mother's eyes were red from crying. She had taken the day off work, which meant losing money their family needed. His grandmother sat straight and tall, her hands folded in her lap. Marcus wanted to turn around and tell them he loved them, but the officers guided him to a table where Ms. Miller was waiting. His public defender looked just as tired as she had the day before. Her briefcase was open and papers were scattered across the table. "Good morning, Marcus," she whispered. "Remember what I told you? The prosecution will probably offer a plea deal. I think you should take it." Marcus shook his head. "I want to fight this." "I'm innocent," Ms. Miller sighed quietly. "We'll see what happens." At the other table, the prosecutor was a young man named David Chen. He was only 28 years old and had been working for the district attorney's office for 3 years. He handled mostly juvenile cases and had a reputation for being tough but fair. Mr. Chen opened his file and reviewed the police report one more time. The case seemed straightforward. The defendant matched the description of the bike thief. The police had arrested him in the right area. There were witnesses who saw someone who looked like Marcus with a red bicycle. Judge Richardson banged his gavel once. "This court is now in session. Mr. Chen, please state your case." The prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor, the people charge Marcus Williams, age 15, with theft of a bicycle valued at approximately $300. On the afternoon of March 15th, witnesses saw the defendant in Riverside Park with a red Schwinn bicycle that belonged to Mrs. Sarah Thompson." Marcus listened carefully to every word. He noticed that the prosecutor said, "Witnesses saw the defendant but did not name the witnesses or say exactly what they saw." "The defendant was arrested 4 blocks from the park," Mr. Chen continued. "When questioned by police, he became argumentative and refused to cooperate with the investigation." Marcus felt angry. He had not been argumentative. He had asked about his rights, which was completely legal. Judge Richardson nodded. "Ms. Miller, how does your client plead?" Ms. Miller stood up slowly. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges." "Very well," the judge said. "Mr. Chen, what evidence do you have?" The prosecutor opened his file. "Your Honor, we have the testimony of 2 witnesses who saw the defendant with the stolen bicycle. We also have the fact that the defendant was arrested in the immediate area shortly after the theft was reported." Marcus raised his hand slightly. "Your Honor, may I ask a question?" Judge Richardson looked surprised. "Excuse me?" "May I ask a question about the evidence?" Marcus repeated. Ms. Miller grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled it down. "Your Honor, my client is young and doesn't understand court procedure." But Judge Richardson was staring at Marcus with interest now. "What kind of question, young man?" Marcus stood up, ignoring Ms. Miller's attempt to pull him back down. "Your Honor, I would like to know the names of these witnesses and exactly what they claim to have seen." The judge's eyebrows went up. "You would like to know?" "Yes, sir. According to the 6th Amendment, I have the right to confront witnesses against me. That means I have the right to know who they are and what they're saying I did." Judge Richardson leaned back in his chair. In 23 years on the bench, he had never had a 15-year-old defendant quote the 6th Amendment to him. Most kids Marcus's age could barely read the charges against them. "Ms. Miller," the judge said, "did you prepare your client to make legal arguments?" Ms. Miller looked embarrassed. "No, Your Honor, I'm not sure where this is coming from." Marcus was still standing. "Your Honor, I prepared myself. I've been reading law books since my father died. He was a public defender, and he taught me that everyone has the right to a fair trial." The courtroom was very quiet now. Everyone was staring at Marcus. His mother had tears in her eyes, but she also looked proud. His grandmother was nodding slightly. Judge Richardson did not like this situation at all. He was used to being the only person in the room who really understood the law. He did not like 15-year-old defendants who quoted constitutional amendments. "Young man," the judge said in a stern voice, "this is my courtroom. I will ask the questions here." "Yes, sir," Marcus said respectfully. "I understand that. But I also understand that I have rights even in your courtroom." The prosecutor looked confused. This was not how juvenile cases usually went. Most kids just sat quietly while the adults decided their fate. Judge Richardson felt his patience running out. This boy was disrupting his efficient courtroom with all this talk about rights and constitutional amendments. The judge had a schedule to keep and a lunch meeting to attend. "Sit down," the judge ordered. "Your lawyer will handle any legal questions." Marcus sat down, but he did not look defeated. If anything, he looked more determined than before. Ms. Miller leaned over and whispered harshly, "What are you doing? You're making the judge angry. This is only going to make things worse for you." But Marcus was not listening to his lawyer anymore. He was watching Judge Richardson's face and thinking about everything his father had taught him. His father had always said that some judges were fair and some were not. The trick was figuring out which kind you were dealing with. Looking at Judge Richardson's annoyed expression and listening to his impatient tone, Marcus was starting to understand what kind of judge he was facing. This was not going to be easy, but Marcus was ready for a fight. He had been preparing for this moment his whole life, even if he had not known it. All those hours reading his father's law books, all those nights studying constitutional cases, all those lessons about justice and fairness had led to this moment. Judge Richardson banged his gavel again. "Mr. Chen, please continue with your case." As the prosecutor began to speak again, Marcus sat quietly and listened. But his mind was working quickly, analyzing every word, looking for weaknesses in the case against him. He was going to prove his innocence, no matter what it took. Mr. Chen continued presenting his case to Judge Richardson. "Your Honor, the first witness is Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, who was walking her dog in Riverside Park at approximately 3:30 p.m. on March 15th. She saw a young black male, approximately 15 years old, riding a red bicycle near the playground." Marcus listened carefully and took mental notes. Mrs. Hayes had seen someone on a red bicycle, but how could she be sure it was him? He had never been to Riverside Park that day. The second witness is Mr. James Patterson, who was jogging through the park at the same time. He also saw a person matching the defendant's description with the red bicycle near the fountain area. Judge Richardson nodded. "And where is this bicycle now?" Mr. Chen shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, the bicycle has not been recovered yet. We believe the defendant may have hidden it or given it to someone else." Marcus felt frustrated. How could they charge him with stealing something they could not even find? He raised his hand again. "Your Honor, may I make an observation?" Judge Richardson's face darkened. "Did I not just tell you to sit quietly and let your lawyer handle this?" "Yes, sir, but nothing," the judge interrupted sharply. "Ms. Miller, control your client." Ms. Miller grabbed Marcus's arm again. "Your Honor, I apologize. My client is just nervous." Marcus felt his anger rising, but he tried to stay calm like his father had taught him. "Your Honor, with respect, I have the right to participate in my own defense." Judge Richardson slammed his gavel down hard. "Young man, you have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you use it. You clearly do not understand how a courtroom works." "Actually, Your Honor, I think I understand more than you might expect," Marcus said, standing up despite Ms. Miller trying to pull him back down. The judge's face turned red. "Excuse me?" Marcus took a deep breath. He knew this was his moment. He could either sit quietly and let them railroad him, or he could fight back using everything his father had taught him. "Your Honor, I've been studying constitutional law since I was 13 years old. I know that the burden of proof is on the prosecution. They have to prove I committed this crime beyond a reasonable doubt." Judge Richardson was getting angrier by the second. "Sit down right now or I will hold you in contempt of court." "Your Honor, I am being respectful. I am simply trying to point out problems with the case against me." Ms. Miller stood up quickly. "Your Honor, perhaps we could take a short recess so I can speak with my client privately." But Judge Richardson was not interested in recesses. He was tired of this smart-mouthed kid who thought he knew about the law. In his experience, young people who acted like they were smarter than everyone else were usually the most guilty. "No recess," the judge said firmly. "This boy needs to learn some respect." Marcus could see that Judge Richardson was not going to listen to reason. The judge had already made up his mind that Marcus was guilty. But Marcus was not going to give up. "Your Honor, the witnesses said they saw someone who looked like me with a bicycle. But looking like someone is not the same as being that person. There are thousands of 15-year-old black males in this city." "That's enough," Judge Richardson snapped. "I don't want to hear any more of your amateur legal theories." "They're not amateur theories," Marcus said. his voice getting stronger. They're based on established legal precedent. In the case of Neil v. Biggers from 1972, the Supreme Court established specific criteria for eyewitness identification. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even Mr. Chen stopped shuffling his papers and stared at Marcus in amazement. Judge Richardson could not believe what he was hearing. This 15-year-old was citing Supreme Court cases from memory. But instead of being impressed, the judge felt threatened and embarrassed. "Listen here, boy," Judge Richardson said, his voice dripping with anger and condescension. "I don't need some stupid kid trying to play lawyer in my courtroom." The word stupid hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt the pain of it in his chest, but also a burning anger. His father had never called him stupid. His teachers had never called him stupid. He was an honor roll student who read law books for fun. "Your Honor, I don't think I'm playing lawyer. I think I'm defending myself against false charges." Judge Richardson stood up behind his bench, towering over the courtroom. "You clearly don't understand how any of this works. Your job is to sit there quietly while the adults handle this." Marcus felt every eye in the courtroom on him. He could hear his mother crying softly behind him. He could feel his grandmother's strength supporting him. "Your Honor, I understand perfectly well how this works. The prosecution is supposed to present evidence that proves I committed a crime. So far, all they have is testimony from 2 people who saw someone who looked like me. That's not proof." Judge Richardson had heard enough. This boy was disrespecting his authority in front of a crowded courtroom. He was making the judge look foolish, and Judge Richardson would not stand for it. "You are obviously too stupid to understand legal proceedings," the judge said, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sit down, shut up, and let the real lawyers handle this case." The word stupid came out even harsher the second time. It hung in the air like a curse. Marcus felt his whole body tense with anger and hurt. In the gallery, his mother gasped. His grandmother's hands tightened into fists. Other people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ms. Miller looked shocked. Even she knew that judges were not supposed to call defendants names, especially young defendants. Mr. Chen frowned. He was trying to prosecute the case fairly, and the judge's behavior was making that difficult. But Marcus did not break down. He did not cry or get angry or lose control. Instead, he thought about his father. He thought about all the times his father had faced unfair judges and biased prosecutors. His father had always said that the law was bigger than any one person, even a judge. Marcus looked directly at Judge Richardson. The judge was still standing, still glowering down at him with angry eyes. "Your Honor," Marcus said in a clear, steady voice, "I believe I understand more about the law than you might think." Judge Richardson laughed, but it was a cruel sound. "Really? You think a 15-year-old kid from the projects knows more about law than a judge with 23 years of experience?" "No, sir," Marcus said. "But I think I know enough to recognize when my constitutional rights are being violated." The judge sat back down, but his anger was still burning. "Your constitutional rights? What would you know about constitutional rights?" Marcus felt a moment of perfect clarity. This was exactly where his father would have wanted him to be. Standing up for justice even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. "I know that the 14th Amendment guarantees me equal protection under the law," Marcus said. "I know that the 6th Amendment gives me the right to confront witnesses and to have effective assistance of counsel." Judge Richardson was getting more frustrated. "And what's your point?" "My point is that calling me stupid and refusing to listen to valid legal arguments violates both of those amendments." The courtroom was so quiet that Marcus could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Everyone was staring at him with amazement, fear, or admiration. Judge Richardson realized he had made a mistake. He had let this boy get under his skin, and now he looked foolish in front of a room full of people. But instead of backing down, he decided to double down. "You want to talk about constitutional rights?" the judge said. "Here's a constitutional right for you. I have the right to maintain order in my courtroom, and that means you sit down and shut up." Marcus remained standing. "Your Honor, maintaining order doesn't mean silencing legitimate legal arguments." "Legitimate?" Judge Richardson laughed again. "Son, you don't know the first thing about legitimate legal arguments. You're just a kid who's watched too many TV shows about lawyers." Marcus felt his father's strength flowing through him. "Your Honor, may I prove that I know more about the law than you think I do?" Judge Richardson was curious despite himself. "What do you mean?" May I recite some relevant case law that applies to my situation? The judge was intrigued. He wanted to see this kid embarrass himself by trying to quote law that he did not really understand. Go ahead, Judge Richardson said with a smirk. Let's hear your law lecture. Marcus took a deep breath. This was his moment. Everything his father had taught him, everything he had learned from those law books, everything he believed about justice and fairness came down to this. He was about to shock everyone in that courtroom, including the judge who had called him stupid. Marcus stood slowly and deliberately. Every person in the courtroom was watching him. His mother held her breath. His grandmother sat forward in her seat. Even the bailiff stopped what he was doing to listen. Judge Richardson leaned back in his chair with a mocking smile. He was sure this 15-year-old boy was about to embarrass himself by trying to quote laws he did not understand. The judge was already planning how he would put this arrogant kid in his place. Your Honor, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. With all due respect, I believe I understand more about the law than you might think. Oh, really? Judge Richardson said sarcastically. Please enlighten us all. Marcus took a deep breath and began. According to the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, I was subjected to an unlawful search and seizure. The smirk started to fade from Judge Richardson's face. The boy's voice was confident, and he was speaking with the precision of someone who really knew what he was talking about. The arresting officers lacked probable cause to stop me, Marcus continued. Simply matching a description of someone on a bicycle while I was walking does not constitute reasonable suspicion under the standards established in Terry v. Ohio. Ms. Miller's mouth fell open. She stared at her young client in amazement. Where was this coming from? Terry v. Ohio 392 U.S. 1, decided by the Supreme Court in 1968, Marcus said clearly. This case established that police officers must have specific and articulable facts that create reasonable suspicion of criminal activity before they can stop and question a citizen. Judge Richardson's smile was completely gone now. He was staring at Marcus with a mixture of shock and disbelief. In 23 years on the bench, he had never heard a defendant, let alone a juvenile defendant, cite case law with such accuracy. The officers told me they had a description of a young black male on a bicycle, Marcus continued. But I was walking, not riding a bicycle. I was carrying library books, not stolen property. The only thing that matched their description was my age and my race. The prosecutor, Mr. Chen, was frantically flipping through his files. He was looking for the police report to check the exact details of the arrest. Furthermore, Marcus said, even if the initial stop had been legal, the officers escalated the situation without justification. When I asked about my constitutional rights, they accused me of being uncooperative. But asking about your rights is not a crime. It's actually protected speech under the First Amendment. Marcus paused for a moment and looked directly at Judge Richardson. The judge was no longer laughing or smiling. He was listening intently, and he looked worried. Your Honor, I was arrested based on insufficient evidence. The Fourth Amendment requires that arrests be supported by probable cause. Probable cause means facts that would lead a reasonable person to believe that a crime has been committed and that the suspect committed it. The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for Marcus's voice. Everyone was hanging on every word. What facts supported my arrest? Marcus asked. 2 witnesses saw someone who looked like me with a bicycle, but they were not asked to identify me in a lineup. They were not shown my photograph. They never said they could positively identify me as the person they saw. Judge Richardson was beginning to realize that this was not going the way he had expected. This boy was not just quoting random legal terms. He was building a logical, well-reasoned argument that was making the judge look foolish. Additionally, Marcus continued, the stolen bicycle was never found. If I had stolen it, where is it? The police never searched my home. They never asked me where I had allegedly hidden it. They simply assumed I was guilty because I matched a general description. Ms. Miller was scribbling notes frantically. She realized that her young client was presenting a better defense than she had prepared. Your Honor, I also want to address the issue of eyewitness identification, Marcus said. In the case of Neal v. Biggers decided in 1972, the Supreme Court established 5 factors that must be considered when evaluating eyewitness testimony. Judge Richardson felt his stomach sinking. He knew the Neal v. Biggers case, but he was shocked that a 15-year-old knew it too. Those factors are, Marcus said, counting on his fingers, the witness's opportunity to view the criminal at the time of the crime, the witness's degree of attention, the accuracy of the witness's prior description, the level of certainty demonstrated by the witness, and the amount of time that passed between the crime and the identification. Marcus looked at the prosecutor. Mr. Chen, can you tell us how these factors apply to the witnesses in my case? Mr. Chen looked uncomfortable. I would need to review the witness statements more carefully. That's exactly my point, Marcus said. The prosecution is asking this court to convict me based on eyewitness testimony that has not been properly evaluated according to established legal standards. Judge Richardson was starting to panic. This 15-year-old was systematically destroying the prosecution's case using case law and constitutional principles. The judge was supposed to be the legal expert in the room, but this boy was demonstrating knowledge that many practicing lawyers did not have. Young man, Judge Richardson interrupted. Where exactly did you learn all of this? Marcus turned back to face the judge. From my father's law books, Your Honor, and from studying in the public library every day after school. Your father was a lawyer? Yes, sir. He was a public defender for 12 years before he died. He taught me that the law exists to protect everyone, especially people who can't protect themselves. Judge Richardson felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. He had called this boy stupid in front of a crow room full of people, but this boy knew more about constitutional law than most of the attorneys who appeared in his courtroom. I'm not finished, Your Honor, Marcus said respectfully but firmly. I also want to address the issue of my so-called uncooperative behavior during the arrest. Judge Richardson nodded weakly. He was afraid to hear what Marcus would say next. According to the Supreme Court decision in Miranda v. Arizona, decided in 1966, I have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney, but I also have the right to ask questions about the legal basis for my arrest. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. When I asked the officers if they had a warrant or probable cause, I was not being uncooperative. I was exercising my Fifth Amendment right to due process and my Sixth Amendment right to understand the charges against me. The gallery was completely captivated. Marcus's mother had stopped crying and was watching her son with pride and amazement. His grandmother was nodding approvingly. Furthermore, Marcus said, my questions to the police officers were reasonable and legitimate. I asked to see my library card to prove where I had been. I offered to provide the names of witnesses who could confirm my alibi. I explained that I did not own a bicycle. Marcus looked directly at Judge Richardson again. Your Honor, none of that behavior was uncooperative. If anything, I was trying to cooperate by providing information that would have quickly resolved this misunderstanding. Judge Richardson realized he was in serious trouble. This boy had just exposed major flaws in the police investigation and the prosecution's case. Worse, he had done it using sophisticated legal reasoning that made everyone else in the courtroom look incompetent. Your Honor, Marcus continued, I want to make one more point about the charges against me. Judge Richardson wanted to stop him, but he could not think of any legal reason to do so. The boy was presenting a legitimate defense, and cutting him off now would look even worse. The prosecution has charged me with theft of property valued at $300, Marcus said, but they have not presented any evidence that I ever possessed this property. They have not shown that I had the opportunity to steal it. They have not established a motive for why I would steal it. Marcus paused and looked around the courtroom. Most importantly, they have not proven that any theft actually occurred. Where is the police report from Mrs. Thompson reporting her bicycle stolen? When exactly was it reported? What evidence do we have that a crime was even committed? Mr. Chen was looking through his files desperately. The police report mentioned the stolen bicycle, but he could not find the original theft report. Judge Richardson was sweating now. He realized that this case was falling apart in his courtroom, and it was being dismantled by a 15-year-old who was demonstrating a better understanding of criminal law than anyone else in the room. Marcus was not finished yet. He had one more surprise that would shock everyone in that courtroom, including the judge who had called him stupid. Marcus was far from finished. He could see that Judge Richardson was shaken, but he knew he had to present his complete legal argument. His father had always told him that in court, you only get one chance to make your case. Your Honor, Marcus continued, I also want to address the serious constitutional violations that have occurred in this case under the Brady v. Maryland decision. Judge Richardson's eyes widened. Brady v. Maryland was an advanced legal concept that most law students struggled with. How could a 15-year-old know about it? Brady v. Maryland, 373 U.S. 83, decided in 1963, Marcus recited. This case established that the prosecution must disclose all potentially exculpatory evidence to the defense. That means any evidence that might prove my innocence. Mr. Chen was starting to look nervous. He was not sure what evidence Marcus was talking about. Mr. Chen, Marcus said, turning to face the prosecutor, have you provided my defense attorney with copies of the original police report from the day I was arrested? Yes, Mr. Chen replied hesitantly. Have you provided copies of the witness statements from Mrs. Hayes and Mr. Patterson? Mr. Chen shuffled through his papers. I believe so. Have you provided the initial theft report filed by Mrs. Thompson when she discovered her bicycle was missing? There was a long pause. Mr. Chen looked through his files again. I'm not sure we have that report. Marcus nodded. That's exactly my point. How can you prove a theft occurred if you don't have a report from the victim saying her property was stolen? Judge Richardson was beginning to understand the full scope of the problem. The prosecution's case was built on assumptions rather than facts. Furthermore, Marcus continued, have you provided any photographs from the alleged crime scene? Any fingerprint evidence? Any DNA evidence? Any surveillance footage from Riverside Park? Mr. Chen's face was getting red. This is a simple theft case. We don't usually collect that kind of evidence for minor crimes. But, Your Honor, Marcus said, the lack of physical evidence is itself evidence of my innocence. If I had stolen this bicycle, there would be some trace of my involvement. Fingerprints on the bike, witnesses who saw me actually taking it, some kind of physical proof. Marcus walked to the center of the courtroom where everyone could see him clearly. His voice was strong and confident now. Instead, what do we have? Two people who saw someone who might have looked like me from a distance. No positive identification. No physical evidence. No proof that a crime even occurred. Judge Richardson was feeling more uncomfortable by the minute. He was supposed to be the authority on legal matters, but this teenager was teaching him things about constitutional law. Your Honor, I want to cite another relevant case, Marcus said. In Regault, 387 U.S. 1 decided in 1967. Ms. Miller dropped her pen. In Regault was the most important Supreme Court case about juvenile rights. How did Marcus know about it? This case established that juveniles have the same constitutional rights as adults in criminal proceedings. Marcus explained. That means I have the right to due process, the right to confront witnesses, and the right to adequate legal representation. Marcus looked directly at Ms. Miller. Your Honor, I don't believe I've received adequate legal representation. My attorney advised me to take a plea deal without investigating the evidence. She didn't interview the witnesses. She didn't challenge the legality of my arrest. She didn't request the physical evidence. Ms. Miller looked embarrassed. She knew Marcus was right, but she was overworked and had too many cases. Under the Sixth Amendment, Marcus continued, I have the right to effective assistance of counsel. If my attorney is not prepared to present an adequate defense, then my constitutional rights are being violated. Judge Richardson was sweating now. He could see where this was going, and he did not like it at all. Your Honor, I also want to address the issue of racial bias in this case, Marcus said. The courtroom got even quieter, if that was possible. The only reason I was arrested is because I matched a vague description of a young black male, but that description could fit thousands of people in this city. Arresting someone based solely on their race and approximate age violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Marcus paused to let that sink in. In the case of Wren v. United States, decided in 1996, the Supreme Court acknowledged that racial profiling is a serious constitutional concern. While they allowed certain stops to continue, they emphasized that race alone cannot be the basis for police action. Mr. Chen was frantically taking notes now. He was realizing that his case had serious problems. Furthermore, Marcus said, the officers who arrested me made no attempt to investigate my alibi before taking me into custody. I told them I had been at the library. I offered to show them my library card with a timestamp. I gave them the name of a librarian who could verify my whereabouts. Marcus pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. Your Honor, I have here a copy of my library checkout receipt from March 15th, timestamped at 3:45 p.m. This proves I was at the Riverside Public Library at the exact time the alleged theft occurred. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Richardson banged his gavel for order. "May I approach the bench, Your Honor?" Marcus asked. Judge Richardson nodded weakly. Marcus walked up and handed him the receipt. The judge examined it carefully. It was genuine, and it showed that Marcus had checked out 3 books on constitutional law at 3:45 p.m. "Mr. Chen," Judge Richardson said, "what time did the alleged theft occur?" The prosecutor checked his notes. "Between 3:30 and 3:45 p.m. according to the witnesses." Judge Richardson stared at the receipt. If Marcus was at the library at 3:45 p.m., he could not have been stealing a bicycle in the park at the same time. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "I also have a letter from Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, confirming that I was in the library's reading room from 2:30 p.m. until 4 p.m. that day." Marcus handed another piece of paper to the judge. This letter was official, on library letterhead, and signed by the librarian. "Additionally," Marcus continued, "the library has security cameras that would show me entering and leaving the building. I have formally requested copies of that footage." Judge Richardson looked at the letter and the receipt. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus could not have committed this crime because he was somewhere else when it happened. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "this brings me to my final point about the constitutional violations in this case." Judge Richardson was afraid to hear what came next. Under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, I have the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But from the moment of my arrest, I have been treated as if I were guilty. Marcus's voice grew stronger. "I was handcuffed and taken to jail based on insufficient evidence. I was charged with a crime based on unreliable witness testimony. I was denied the opportunity to present my alibi." Marcus looked around the courtroom. "Most importantly, Your Honor, I have been called stupid in this very courtroom for exercising my constitutional rights and presenting a legal defense." Judge Richardson felt his face burning with shame. He had made a terrible mistake, and now everyone knew it. "Your Honor," Marcus concluded, "I have presented clear evidence of my innocence. I have documented multiple constitutional violations. I have shown that the prosecution's case lacks merit." Marcus stood tall and looked directly at Judge Richardson. "Based on all of this evidence and legal precedent, I respectfully request that all charges against me be dismissed immediately." The courtroom was completely silent. Everyone was staring at Marcus in amazement. This 15-year-old boy had just presented a legal argument that would have impressed a Supreme Court justice. Judge Richardson sat quietly for a long moment, staring at the evidence in front of him. He knew that Marcus was right about everything. The case was a disaster, and continuing with it would only make things worse. But admitting that a 15-year-old was right meant admitting that he, a judge with 23 years of experience, had been wrong about everything. The courtroom remained silent for what felt like hours, though it was only about 30 seconds. Judge Richardson stared down at the library receipt and the letter from Mrs. Chen. The evidence was right there in black and white. Impossible to deny. Mr. Chen, the prosecutor, was frantically flipping through his files, looking for something, anything that could save his case. But the more he looked, the more he realized how weak his evidence really was. "Mr. Chen," Judge Richardson said finally, his voice much quieter than before, "do you have any response to the defendant's evidence?" The prosecutor stood up slowly. He was only 28 years old, and he had never had a case fall apart so completely in court. "Your Honor, I need to review this new evidence." "It's not new evidence," Marcus said firmly but respectfully. "I tried to tell the arresting officers about my alibi, but they wouldn't listen. I asked my attorney to investigate it, but she told me to take a plea deal instead." Ms. Miller sank lower in her chair. She knew she had failed her client badly. Judge Richardson removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. In 23 years on the bench, he had never been so thoroughly embarrassed. This 15-year-old had not only proven his innocence, but had also exposed serious problems with the police investigation and the prosecution's case. "Mr. Chen," the judge said, "does the state have any physical evidence connecting the defendant to this alleged crime?" Mr. Chen shuffled through his papers one more time. "No, Your Honor, no physical evidence. Do you have any witnesses who can positively identify the defendant as the person they saw with the bicycle?" "No, Your Honor." The witnesses said they saw someone who looked like the defendant, but they were never asked to make a positive identification. Judge Richardson felt his anger building, but this time it was not directed at Marcus. It was directed at the sloppy police work and lazy prosecution that had brought this innocent boy to his courtroom. "Mr. Chen, do you even have proof that a crime was committed?" There was a long pause. Mr. Chen looked through his files again. "Your Honor, I don't seem to have the original theft report from Mrs. Thompson." "So you don't know when she reported her bicycle stolen? You don't know if she actually filed a police report?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Richardson looked at Marcus, who was standing quietly with his hands folded in front of him. The boy's dignity and composure were impressive, especially after being called stupid and treated so badly. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, "you mentioned that you have requested security footage from the library?" "Yes, Your Honor. I submitted a formal request yesterday. The footage should be available within 48 hours. Judge Richardson nodded. "And this footage would show you entering and leaving the library on the day in question?" "Yes, sir. It would show that I was there from 2:30 p.m. until 4 p.m., which covers the entire time period when this alleged theft occurred." The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Mr. Chen, have you made any effort to obtain this security footage?" Mr. Chen looked embarrassed. "No, Your Honor, we didn't think it was necessary. You didn't think it was necessary to investigate the defendant's alibi. We thought the witness testimony was sufficient." Judge Richardson felt his temper rising again. "You thought that vague descriptions from witnesses who never made a positive identification were sufficient to convict a 15-year-old boy." "Your Honor," Mr. Chen said weakly, "this seemed like a straightforward case." "Straightforward?" Judge Richardson's voice was getting louder. "You arrested this boy based on nothing more than the fact that he's young and black. You charged him with a crime without checking if a crime was even committed. You ignored his alibi and refused to investigate the evidence he offered to provide." Marcus watched this exchange with interest. The judge who had called him stupid was now defending him against the prosecutor. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "may I add one more piece of evidence?" Judge Richardson nodded. "Please." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out another piece of paper. "This is a receipt from Murphy's Corner Store, dated March 15th at 4:15 p.m. It shows that I bought a candy bar and a soda on my way home from the library." Marcus handed the receipt to the judge. Murphy's Corner Store is 6 blocks from the library and 8 blocks from Riverside Park. The store has security cameras that would also confirm my whereabouts. Judge Richardson examined the receipt. The timestamp was clear, 4:15 p.m. on March 15th. If Marcus was buying candy at 4:15 p.m., he definitely had not been stealing bicycles earlier that afternoon. "Mr. Chen," the judge said, "have you investigated any of the defendant's alibi evidence?" "No, Your Honor." "Have you spoken to the librarian who can confirm his whereabouts?" "No, Your Honor." "Have you checked with the corner store to verify this receipt?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Richardson slammed his hand down on his desk. "Then what exactly have you investigated?" Mr. Chen had no answer. Marcus stepped forward slightly. "Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to address one more constitutional issue." Judge Richardson nodded. After everything he had heard, he was curious to see what else this remarkable young man had to say. "Under the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause," Marcus said, "the government cannot deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. I have been deprived of my liberty by being arrested and jailed. I have been deprived of property because my mother had to take time off work to be here today, costing our family money we can't afford to lose." Marcus's voice was steady, but there was emotion behind it now. "Most importantly, Your Honor, I have been deprived of my reputation and my sense of safety in my own community. When police officers can arrest any young black man based on nothing more than a vague description, none of us are safe." The courtroom was completely captivated. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to listen. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, "this case represents everything that's wrong with our criminal justice system. Poor police work, lazy prosecution, overworked public defenders who don't have time to investigate their cases." Marcus looked around the courtroom. "But it also represents something positive. It shows that the Constitution really does protect everyone, even 15-year-old boys from poor neighborhoods who get arrested for crimes they didn't commit." Judge Richardson felt tears forming in his eyes. This boy had taught him more about justice in 30 minutes than he had learned in 23 years on the bench. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, "your knowledge of the law is extraordinary. Where did you learn all of this?" Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. "From my father, Your Honor. He used to bring me to his office when I was little. He taught me that the law is like a tool. It can be used to help people or to hurt people. The important thing is to make sure it's used fairly." "What was your father's name?" "David Williams, Your Honor. He was a public defender for 12 years. Judge Richardson's eyes widened. "David Williams? I knew your father. He was one of the best attorneys I ever worked with. He appeared in my courtroom many times." Marcus's eyes lit up. "You knew my father?" "I did. He was brilliant, just like you. He fought for his clients, especially the ones who couldn't fight for themselves." Judge Richardson stood up behind his bench. "Your father would be very proud of you today, son." The judge looked at Mr. Chen. "Mr. Chen, do you wish to continue with this prosecution?" The prosecutor shook his head. "No, Your Honor. Based on the evidence presented, I don't think we can meet our burden of proof." Judge Richardson nodded. "Ms. Miller, do you have anything to add?" Ms. Miller stood up, looking embarrassed. "Your Honor, I apologize for not providing adequate representation to my client. He clearly knew more about his case than I did." Judge Richardson looked down at Marcus, who was standing tall and proud in the center of the courtroom. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, "I owe you an apology." Judge Richardson took a long, deep breath before speaking. The courtroom was so quiet that everyone could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, his voice much different from the harsh tone he had used earlier, "I owe you a sincere and public apology." Marcus stood quietly, waiting to hear what the judge would say next. "I called you stupid," Judge Richardson continued, his voice heavy with shame. "I was wrong. Not just wrong, but completely, embarrassingly wrong. Your knowledge of constitutional law is extraordinary for someone of any age, let alone 15 years old." The judge looked around the courtroom. "In 23 years on this bench, I have never seen a more thorough or more skillful legal defense. You have proven not only your innocence but also your remarkable understanding of our legal system." Marcus felt his eyes filling with tears. But these were different tears than the ones he had held back earlier. These were tears of relief and vindication. "All charges against you are dismissed immediately," Judge Richardson announced. "Furthermore, I am ordering that this arrest be expunged from your record completely. It will be as if this never happened, at least legally." The gallery erupted in quiet applause. Marcus's mother was crying openly now, tears of joy streaming down her face. His grandmother was nodding with satisfaction, as if she had expected this outcome all along. "Mr. Chen," Judge Richardson turned to the prosecutor, "I want a full investigation into how this case reached my courtroom. Someone needs to answer for this failure of the system." Mr. Chen nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I'll start the investigation immediately." "Ms. Miller," the judge said to the public defender, "I strongly suggest you review your case management procedures. Mr. Williams deserved better representation than he received." Ms. Miller stood up. "Your Honor, you're absolutely right. I let my client down and I'm going to make changes to ensure this doesn't happen again." Judge Richardson banged his gavel once. "Court is dismissed. Mr. Williams, please remain for a moment." As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus's mother and grandmother rushed forward to hug him. His mother held him tight, whispering, "I'm so proud of you," over and over. His grandmother kissed his forehead and said, "Your father is smiling down on you today." After his family stepped back, Judge Richardson came down from his bench. Without his robe, he looked like a regular person, not the intimidating figure he had seemed earlier. "Marcus," the judge said, "may I speak with you privately for a few minutes?" Marcus nodded, and they walked to a small conference room next to the courtroom. The judge sat down across from Marcus at a simple wooden table. "I want you to know," Judge Richardson began, "that what happened here today changed me. I've been a judge for more than 20 years, and I thought I knew everything about the law. You taught me that I still have a lot to learn." Marcus listened respectfully. "Your father was one of the finest attorneys I ever worked with," the judge continued. "He had the same passion for justice that you showed today, the same intelligence, the same courage to stand up for what's right." "Thank you, Your Honor," Marcus said quietly. "I have a proposition for you," Judge Richardson said. "I know some people at the state university who run a program for gifted students interested in law. They provide scholarships, mentoring, and special classes. Would you be interested in something like that? Marcus's eyes widened. You mean I could study law in college? Even though my family doesn't have much money? Marcus, after what I saw today, I think any law school in the country would be honored to have you. But first you need to finish high school and get into a good college. This program could help with that. Judge Richardson pulled out a business card and wrote a phone number on the back. This is my personal number. I want you to call me next week, and we'll set up a meeting with Dr. Sarah Martinez. She runs the pre-law program at the university. Marcus took the card with trembling hands. Why are you doing this for me? The judge smiled sadly. Because I owe it to you, and because I owe it to your father's memory, and because our legal system needs more people like you, people who understand that justice isn't just about following rules, but about doing what's right. They walked back to the main courtroom where Marcus's family was waiting. Judge Richardson shook hands with Marcus's mother and grandmother. Mrs. Williams, the judge said, you have raised an extraordinary young man. He's going to do great things. Marcus's mother smiled through her tears. His father always said Marcus was special. He just needed the chance to prove it. As they left the courthouse, Marcus felt different than when he had entered. He was still the same person, but he now knew something about himself that he had not known before. He could fight. He could win. He could make a difference. The story of what happened in Judge Richardson's courtroom that day spread quickly through the legal community. Lawyers talked about the 15-year-old who had schooled a veteran judge on constitutional law. Law professors used it as an example in their classes, but the story also spread through Marcus's neighborhood. People looked at him differently now. They saw him not just as a smart kid, but as someone who had stood up to the system and won. Marcus went back to reading in the library every day, just like before. But now other young people sometimes joined him. They wanted to learn about the law too. They wanted to understand their rights. Marcus was happy to teach them what he knew. 6 months later, Marcus got a call from Dr. Martinez at the university. The pre-law program had accepted him for the following year. They would pay for his college education and provide him with mentors and internships. You've been given a great opportunity, Dr. Martinez told him during their first meeting. But more than that, you've earned it. What you did in that courtroom was remarkable. Marcus started the program the following summer, while still finishing his senior year of high school. He studied constitutional law, criminal procedure, and civil rights. Every class reminded him of his father and that day in court. Judge Richardson kept his promise to mentor Marcus. They met once a month to discuss legal cases and Marcus's studies. The judge had changed too since that day. He was more careful about his assumptions, more willing to listen to defendants, especially young ones. You taught me something important, Judge Richardson told Marcus during one of their meetings. You taught me that justice isn't about being right all the time. It's about being willing to admit when you're wrong and learning from your mistakes. Marcus graduated high school as valedictorian. In his graduation speech, he talked about his father and about the importance of standing up for justice, even when it's difficult. My father taught me that the law is a tool, Marcus told his classmates and their families. It can be used to help people or to hurt people. Our job is to make sure it's used to help. Marcus went on to study at the State University on a full scholarship. He majored in political science and philosophy, preparing for law school. He also started a program to teach constitutional rights to young people in his old neighborhood. Every week, Marcus would go back to the community center where he had played as a child. He taught kids about their rights during police encounters. He explained how the court system worked. He showed them that knowledge really was power. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're too young to understand the law, Marcus would tell the kids. You have rights and you need to know what they are. 4 years later, Marcus graduated from college with highest honors. He was accepted to 3 law schools, including Harvard and Yale. But he chose to stay close to home, attending the state law school where he could continue his community work. In law school, Marcus specialized in criminal defense and civil rights law, just like his father had. His professors were amazed by his knowledge and his passion for justice. But Marcus never forgot where he came from or why he was studying law. During his second year of law school, Marcus got a call from Ms. Miller, the public defender who had represented him so poorly years before. She had heard about his success and wanted to offer him an internship. I've changed how I handle cases since that day, she told him. You taught me that every client deserves a real defense, not just a quick plea deal. I'd be honored to have you work with me. Marcus accepted the internship. He wanted to help other young people who found themselves in the same situation he had been in. He worked on cases involving juveniles charged with crimes they didn't commit. He helped prepare defenses based on constitutional violations and police misconduct. Judge Richardson often asked Marcus to speak to groups of judges and lawyers about juvenile justice and constitutional rights. Marcus always accepted these invitations, seeing them as opportunities to improve the system for other young people. The day Marcus Williams walked into my courtroom changed everything, Judge Richardson would tell these groups. He reminded me that justice isn't about age or experience or position. It's about truth and fairness and the courage to do what's right. After graduating from law school, Marcus passed the bar exam on his first try. He was offered jobs at prestigious law firms in big cities, but he chose to work as a public defender in his hometown, taking the same job his father had held years before. On his first day of work, Marcus sat in the same office where his father had worked. The walls were still lined with law books. The desk was still